Welcome pilots. In this video, we're going to be talking about airworthiness. This is going to be the first of a couple of videos that discuss this topic, which is Task B in the Private Pilot ACS. In this video, we're going to talk about aircraft documents and aircraft inspections. And in the end, I will give you tips on how to study and what kind of questions you can expect. My name is Luke, and I'm a private pilot, and I've made it my goal to try and help you pass your check ride. I'm excited for this. Let's begin.
Okay, so I'm here in a Google Doc because there's going to be quite a lot of writing uh, in this topic, and this is the easiest way and the cleanest way I can display the information. And so looking at Task B, which covers airworthiness requirements, the first item is the location and expiration date of required aircraft certificates. Now, there's an acronym that pilots use to remember these documents and certificates, and that acronym is ARROW. And the A in ARROW stands for the Airworthiness Certificate. And as I go through and break down each letter in this document, I suggest that you go along and take notes in a similar manner to the way I'm doing. That way you can fold the page in half, and then you'll basically have a flashcard, and you can flip the page back and forth and memorize, what's the location of the airworthiness, when, does the airworthiness certificate expire, which we'll get into in a second. And that way you can recite all the information you know and then flip it over to check. But definitely take notes on this video. It's definitely going to be the best way you're going to remember the contents. So the airworthiness certificate does not expire as long as the required maintenance and inspections are completed. Additionally, the airworthiness certificate must be in view of all the crew members or the passengers. And so most likely your airworthiness certificate is going to be in the cockpit. Now, the first R in ARROW stands for registration. And unlike the airworthiness certificate, the registration of an aircraft does expire. The registration of an aircraft lasts for 7 years, and it must be kept on board the aircraft. The rule used to be that the registration only lasts 3 years, but that's since been changed. So now it's important to know that registration of an aircraft lasts for 7 years. And most likely, when talking about these two documents in particular, you're going to find the airworthiness and the registration in the same spot. I remember when I was training, the airworthiness certificate and the registration were in a pocket near my left leg in the 172 that I was flying. And so before your check ride, you're just going to want to know where these documents are in case the DPE asks you about them. Now, the second R in ARROW stands for radio station license. And you'll notice there's an asterisk because this one is not always necessary. And so you may see ARROW being spelled out with only one R, and that's because you only need a radio station license if you're flying internationally. I do most of my flying in the United States. In fact, I do all of my flying in the United States, and so I don't have to worry about a radio station license. But if I were to hop the border and do a flight to Canada or Mexico, I would need a radio station license because that becomes an international flight. Now, the O in ARROW stands for the operational limitations of the aircraft you're flying. And the place that you're going to find the operational limitations is going to be the pilot's operating handbook. So your POH. The POH for that make and model of the aircraft must be on board so that you'll know the operational limitations of the aircraft. And finally, to round out ARROW, we have weight and balance information. And in order to do the proper pre-flight and the proper calculations to make sure you're within the envelope for your flight, you're going to need the most current weight and balance information, so that has to be on board. So when thinking about aircraft documents, remember the acronym ARROW, and then I have the location of each document, or at least where it should be. For airworthiness, it specifically has to be within view. The rest of them technically just have to be on board the aircraft. And then, for documents that do expire, like the registration and radio station license, you're going to need to be aware of the expiration dates. So I hope this little chart I've created here helps you remember ARROW and apply it during your check ride. Okay, so the next item under Task B, Airworthiness, is the required inspections and airplane logbook documentation. Just like with the aircraft documents for aircraft inspections, there is a acronym that pilots use to remember all of the various inspections and their due dates and, all the information relative to that. And so the acronym is AAVIAT. And I'll break each one down as I go along here. And just like with the ARROW, I suggest that you take notes. It's quite a bit of information, and taking notes is definitely still the best way to retain all this information. So the first A is going to stand for airworthiness directives. These may also be referred to as ADs. So if you hear anybody talking about ADs, or if the DPE asks you, can you prove that all the ADs have been complied with, he's talking about airworthiness directives, or she. Now, airworthiness directives are like mandatory recalls that are issued out by the FAA. This means that there has been some flaw spotted in the aircraft, or some known issue, and they want an AMP to take a closer look at your aircraft in particular to make sure that that issue doesn't exist in your aircraft. The ADs come with specific instructions on how to comply with said AD, and sort of a timetable to comply by. So some ADs may say within the next 30 days an AMP has to do X, Y, and Z, or an AD may say at the next annual inspection, or at the next 100-hour or annual inspection, an AMP has to do X, Y, and Z. And there's two types of ADs. You have the recurring ADs. These happen time and time again. And then you have non-recurring ADs. So these are one-time checks. For example, in the Cessna 172, I believe there is a recurring AD for an AMP to inspect the seat railing because they've been known to go bad after a while. And if your seat railing fails, you may slide back on takeoff, and that would cause quite a few issues. Now, the regulation that covers ADs is 14 CFR Part 39. That's just there if you want to get some more information. And then the final thing to note with ADs are that they're recorded in their own separate log. So with all the inspections, they're all going to be recorded in somewhere, right? We're not just putting a sticky note in the airplane that says, I've done all these inspections. There's most likely going to be a log for all of these. And the three main logs are the engine log, the propeller log, and the aircraft log. But as we go through this acronym, you'll notice that there's a few inspections that don't go into those three main logs. For example, ADs are not recorded in any of those logs, at least not that I know of. When I did my check ride, the ADs were recorded separately in a folder that had a sheet of all the ADs that have ever gone out, and the most recent ones were on top. And so before my check ride, I went through and I put a sticky note by each recurring AD, so that if the examiner asked me, have all the recurring ADs been complied with, I could pull them up really quick and show to him that they have. But yeah, now in the main log, for example, the aircraft log, it may say at the end of the annual inspection, all ADs have been complied with, but that doesn't mean that's the log of the ADs. The ADs are going to be somewhere else where it says specifically this AD was checked, has been complied with on this date. So that's just something to know. You're not going to find the ADs in one of the three main logs. Now the next A covers the annual, and the annual is something that you will find in the three main logs. And then one thing last to note about ADs, they're mandatory for any aircraft. So if an AD goes out for your make and model of the aircraft, you have to comply. And that goes for the same with the annual inspection. All aircraft, if they want to remain airworthy, they need to undergo an annual inspection. An annual inspection must be completed within 12 calendar months of the previous annual inspection, and there's no give on that. Now you may be asking, in what situation might there be a little give and take? And we'll get to that in one of the inspections later. There's an exception for the 100 hour, but for the annual, it must be performed within 12 calendar months. There's no flex on that. An annual inspection is performed on the propeller, the engine, and the aircraft, and an annual inspection has to be performed by an A&P mechanic with inspection authority. Again, you may be asking, what does that mean? But it's a key difference between the annual and the 100 hour. And the regulation for the annual is 91.409, and like I said, it's recorded in the propeller, engine, and aircraft log. I may switch back and forth between airplane and aircraft. It's the same thing. So the annual is a mandatory inspection for all aircraft, unlike the next inspection. The next inspection, or test, is the VOR. So in order for an aircraft to fly IFR, which if you're just getting your normal private pilots, you won't be doing, but eventually, I hope aspiring pilots want to get their IFR rating. But in order to fly IFR, the VORs needed to be inspected within the preceding 30 days of the flight. There's 5 ways to test a VOR. I won't go into all 5 ways here, but I'll probably put a screenshot up so you can take a look. And these tests can be performed by a pilot. The regulation that states this is 91.171, and just like the ADs, the VORs are recorded in their own log. I remember for one of the planes that I was flying, it had a dispatch binder, and right in the front of the dispatch binder was the VOR log, so that any pilot could test the VORs and confirm that they were good, and so the aircraft could stay IFR current. Now, the next inspection is going to be the 100-hour inspection. Now, this isn't necessary for all aircraft. This is only necessary for aircraft that operate for hire. For example, I have a friend who owns his own plane. He's very lucky, and he doesn't need to get a 100-hour inspection done on that aircraft. He just flies it privately to get around, to have fun. So he doesn't need a 100-hour. He doesn't rent it out. But my flight school does operate their aircraft for hire, and so they need their 100-hour done on their aircraft. Now, the aircraft has to be inspected every 100 hours, and that 100 hours is determined by the tach time of the aircraft, notably not the Hobbs time. So there's 2 times in the aircraft. There's a Hobbs time, and that starts running when you turn the battery on, and then you have the tach time, and that starts running when you turn the engine on. And just like the annual, the 100-hour is inspected on the propeller, engine, and aircraft log. Unlike the annual, the inspection can be done by any A&P mechanic. Inspection authority is not required. And the regulation for this is 91.409, which is the same regulation for the annual. And because there's a 100-hour inspection on the propeller, engine, and airplane, it's going to be recorded in the propeller, engine, and airplane log.
So I actually have the FAR AIM pulled out here, and I'm reviewing the regulation 91.409, because in section B, there's a little bit of a tricky statement. Basically, for the 100-hour, you can fly past 100 hours. Now, this may not make sense to you. It's a 100-hour inspection. Shouldn't you have to get it inspected at 100 hours? And the answer is yes. But there's a caveat. For example, if I were to get into a plane that's at 96 hours on the tach time, basically it has 4 hours left to get its 100-hour inspection. I can go and fly it on a 3-hour cross-country away from the home airport. Now, this is going to put me at 99 hours, and if I were to return home, well, that's another 3-hour cross-country. That'll put me at 102 hours. I'll be over the 100-hour limit of the 100-hour inspection. Is my flight legal? Well, it depends. Are you flying home, or are you flying on another joyride? If you're flying on a joyride to another airport where you're not going to get it inspected, then it's not legal. But if you're flying home back to the airport of origin, back to the airport where the aircraft gets maintained, it is a legal flight. 91.409B says that the aircraft has a 10-hour window past the 100-hour to return back to its airport of origin or airport of maintenance. So if I'm flying home, it's legal. But the last thing that you have to know about this 10-hour window is that these hours aren't free. If I were to fly 2 hours past the 100-hour, I owe 2 hours on the next 100 hours. So the next 100 hour is going to come in 98 hours instead of, well, 100. And if I were to fly 3 hours past when the 100 hour was due, well, the next 100 hours is going to occur in 97 hours. And if I were to fly, 7 hours past when the 100 hour was due, well, the next 100 hour is going to occur at 93 hours. So whatever time, the aircraft goes past its 100 hour, that's just going to be paid back in the next one. So this isn't a loophole for aircraft owners to slowly, add on hours to their 100 hour. It's just giving them some flexibility. But it's important to know because your DP probably will ask you, what happens if you're at 99 hours and you're not at the airport where the aircraft gets maintained? Can you return to the airport where the aircraft gets maintained? And as long as the flight only lasts less than the 10-hour window, yeah, you can complete the flight. So this is the last thing about the 100-hour inspection. It's a little nitty-gritty, and you probably should read the regulation. But this is a nice visual, I think, to explain, the caveat within the 100-hour inspection.
Okay, so we're going to round out the inspections here, and these last three are all going to be found in the airplane log. And the final A in AAVIATE stands for the altimeter and static system inspection. And you'll notice I put an asterisk next to it, and that's because technically this inspection is required only for IFR flight, but chances are it's happening on your aircraft even if you can't fly IFR. And it's something just like the VOR inspection, you might as well learn it now so you don't have to learn it later. And this inspection needs to be performed every 24 calendar months by an AMP mechanic. And the regulation is 91.411 if you want to look it up. And once again, it's recorded in the airplane log. Now, another inspection in the airplane log is going to be the transponder, and funnily enough, it's also the regulation right next to the altimeter and static system inspection. It's regulation 91.413. And it has the same duration. So this states that any aircraft operating an ATC transponder must have the transponder inspected every 24 calendar months. And so when you're looking through your airplane logbook, chances are you're going to see these two inspections right next to each other because they happen within the same duration. And they're both going to be recorded in the airplane log. And the last inspection that we're going to talk about is the ELT inspection, or Emergency Locator Transmitter. And the ELT inspection, unlike the other two that I just talked about, gets inspected every 12 calendar months. And the battery has to be replaced when it's either had 1 hour of cumulative use or when 50% of its useful life has degraded. And the regulation for that is going to be 91.207, and it's recorded in the aircraft log. Now, the chart that I've just created is nice, and I think it's useful in covering all the information, but at a glance, it's very wordy, and it's hard to derive the necessary information from each inspection. So I'm going to go back to my whiteboard and kind of give you a much simpler way of looking at things, just so you can get the full picture and have an easier time understanding it. So I'm going to head over to the whiteboard.
So what I've done here is I've made a very simple diagram, kind of reflecting the Google Doc that I was just showing you. But I hope you remember, that the first A is ADs and the second A is annual. If you took notes, you can refer to that to kind of help you out. But this is the diagram that I drew, whenever I had free time to study the inspections. It's good to know the regulation, but it's better to just know the duration, and it's better to just know where you can find them. And that's what this chart does. So for, ADs, there's a special duration for each AD that's given out. So I just put NA for non-applicable. But for the annual, the annual has to happen every 12 months. So it says 12 months. For the VOR, 30 days. For the 100-hour tach time. For the altimeter, every 24 months. For the transponder, every 24 months. For the ELT, every 12 months. And then here in color-coded letters, I have where all the inspections are either taking place or where they're logged. So like I mentioned, the ADs and the VORs, those inspections go in their own separate log, but the 100-hour and the annual, well, the airplane, the engine, and the propeller all get inspected. So you have the A for airplane, E for engine, and P for propeller. And the same thing with the altimeter, the transponder, and the ELT. Those are all recorded in the airplane log. So this is a very good basic simplification of what you need to know, but it doesn't have all the details. For example, this chart doesn't say that you need an AMP with inspection authority for the annual, but you don't need one for the 100-hour. That's something that the other chart that I created in the Google Doc is better suited for. But for just right off the bat, questions that I can guarantee the DPE is going to ask you about, you're going to want to know this chart because it gives you the location of the inspections and the duration of the inspections. With all that being said, that wraps up our discussion on part 1 of airworthiness. In this video, we discussed aircraft documents and aircraft inspections. Now, before you go, I'd like to give you a couple tips on how to study. As I was mentioning when I was talking about the Google Docs, I said that you should take notes. Now, what I did is I printed out the Google Doc that I made. And you should have notes that are relatively similar to this. Then I folded it in half. And what you have is kind of like a flashcard. And the whole idea of this is that you can look on the side that lists all the inspections or all the aircraft documents, and then you can talk through each item. When you're done, you can flip it over and test what you said with the answer. And the point of this exercise is so that you get comfortable talking through the information. Because really, your oral exam is a conversation. If you know the information but you can't talk about it, you can't show the DPE that you know the information. So it's very important that you learn how to talk through the information. The kind of questions you can expect on your oral exam, well, for this part, there's not really going to be questions. It's more about showing the examiner. You're going to want to show the examiner in the logbooks that each inspection has been done. You're going to want to show the examiner where the aircraft documents are. Now, you may get a question on how long does this inspection last, or how long is this document valid for? But really, the questions aren't going to be that tricky. It's more about you finding and proving that the aircraft you're flying is airworthy. Because eventually, when you pass, it's going to be up to you to determine that information. So be used to that. Take a look at your maintenance logs before you go in for your check ride, and that should be a big help. That is the end of this video. I had a lot of fun making it. I hoped it's helped you study, and there will be a couple others to finish out the discussion around airworthiness, especially around pilot preventative maintenance and inoperable equipment. I hope to see you there.